We were two friends, Mike and I, driving through the countryside on our way back home. It was getting late, and Mike, always up for an adventure, suggested a shortcut. We took this isolated road, a decision that would lead to the most terrifying night of our lives. The road narrowed, and the trees seemed to close in, casting these eerie shadows in the fading light. But we were enjoying the ride, laughing and joking, until we hit a patch of mud. The car skidded, and before we knew it, we were stuck, wheels spinning and sinking deeper into the mire. We tried to get the car out, pushing and digging, but it was no use. Night was falling fast, and the darkness seemed to swallow us whole. We decided to wait for help, hoping someone would pass by soon. As we sat there, the silence felt suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt like we were the only souls for miles around, this eerie isolation that made my skin crawl. Mike tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes and playing music on his phone. But despite his efforts, a sense of unease lingered in the air, this feeling that something wasn't right. The night grew darker, and that's when things started to get weird. We heard strange noises, like whispers carried by the wind. At first, we dismissed it as the sound of the trees, but these whispers seemed to be calling our names. I felt this chill down my spine, this sense of being watched. I glanced around, but there was nothing there, just the darkness and the trees. Then, the car's headlights flickered, casting these unsettling shadows around us. Mike checked the engine, but everything seemed fine. It was this fear creeping in, this sense that something was playing with us. As we sat there, the air grew colder, this biting cold that seemed to seep into our bones. Mike joked about ghosts, but deep down, I couldn't shake off this feeling of dread. We both saw it, this figure in the distance, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to dart between the trees. Mike laughed it off, said it was probably an animal, but I knew it wasn't. There was something sinister about that shadow, this fear that it was watching us, waiting. The whispers grew louder, this haunting sound that seemed to echo all around us. Mike tried to block it out with music, but even that didn't drown out the eerie voices that seemed to call to us from the darkness. Then, the car radio crackled to life, this static noise that made us both jump. It was this garbled voice, this strange language that sent shivers down my spine. We turned it off, but the static continued, this relentless noise that added to our growing fear. I looked out the window, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces in the trees, these twisted, contorted faces that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Mike laughed it off, said it was just our imagination, but I knew what I saw. We both felt this overwhelming sense of dread, this fear that we were not alone, that something malevolent lurked in the darkness. We locked the doors, huddled inside the car, trying to ward off this growing terror. Time seemed to crawl, this endless night that refused to end. Every little sound made us jump, this fear that it might be something lurking just beyond our sight. Then, headlights approached in the distance, a car coming down the road. Relief flooded through us, this hope that help had finally arrived. But as the car got closer, we realized it wasn't a rescue team. It was this old, beaten-up vehicle, and the driver, there was something off about him. He stopped near us, this eerie grin on his face. He said he'd help us, but his voice was this strange, raspy whisper that made my skin crawl. Mike hesitated, but before we could react, the man vanished into the darkness. We waited, this unease settling in as the minutes turned into hours. Help never came, and the whispers, the strange noises, they continued. I tried to call for help on my phone, but there was no signal, just this eerie silence that seemed to envelope us. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The whispers ceased, the shadows retreated, and the night felt quiet once more. We saw headlights in the distance again, this time a rescue team that had finally found us. We were saved, but that night, those eerie occurrences, they stayed with us. I left the party, tired but content, waving goodbye to my friends. The train station was eerily quiet, the platform deserted. I rushed towards the last train, grateful it hadn't left yet. Boarding it, relief washed over me, and I found a seat near the window. Exhaustion coursed through my body, and I welcomed the idea of resting during the journey home. I must have dozed off because when I awoke, the train was at a standstill. Darkness enveloped the surroundings, an unfamiliar desolation outside the window. Panic surged within me as I realized this wasn't my stop. The train should have ended its journey long before this desolate station. Anxiety knotted in my stomach. I checked my phone, no signal, no notifications. It felt surreal, the train at a halt in the middle of nowhere. The carriages were empty, save for me. I strained to peer outside, but it was pitch black, save for the dim glow of the train's interior lights. With a trembling breath, I stepped onto the platform. No station lights, no sign of life. I was utterly alone. My mind raced, contemplating the next move. Panic started to gnaw at me, urging me to get back on the train, to stay safe within its confines. But that option was gone. The train had departed. The only choice was to search for help. I hugged my coat tighter around me and started walking, hoping to find any semblance of civilization. The path seemed endless, shadows stretching across the deserted landscape. Fear crept in, each step feeling heavier, more uncertain. Then, two figures emerged from the darkness, a pair of men, their silhouettes stark against the night. My heart hammered in my chest. I stopped, uncertainty seizing my movements. They approached slowly, speaking amongst themselves in hushed tones. Their words were indistinguishable, but their presence was unnerving. I tried to reason with myself, to dismiss the anxiety as paranoia. Maybe they were just stranded like me, looking for a way out. But unease settled in as they drew closer. Their faces were obscured in the dim light, expressions hidden. I couldn't gauge their intentions. One of them spoke, his voice low and gravelly, asking if I needed help. His words sent shivers down my spine. I nodded, trying to keep calm, but their proximity felt suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to run, to flee from these strangers in the dead of night. I stammered a response, trying to appear composed. But their demeanor was unsettling, an underlying threat in their presence. They exchanged glances, almost as if communicating without words. Fear gripped me tighter, a sense of vulnerability overwhelming my senses. One of them stepped closer, too close for comfort. My pulse raced, and I backed away, feeling the cold metal of the train platform behind me. Their intentions seemed sinister, and I realized I was trapped between the darkness and the strangers. I mustered every ounce of courage and asked if there was a nearby town or if they had a phone. But their response was evasive, dismissive. They seemed more interested in my presence than helping. Dread settled in, a knot of dread and alarm in my chest. My mind raced, contemplating escape routes, looking for any possible way out of this ominous encounter. But fear paralyzed me, rendering me incapable of rational thought. Their proximity was suffocating, their presence oppressive. The situation escalated as they stepped closer, their intentions becoming clearer, menacing, malicious. Panic consumed me, and I made a desperate dash, my feet pounding against the uneven ground, heart pounding in my chest. Their voices echoed behind me, growing distant as I sprinted, tears blurring my vision. The night air stunned my lungs, the adrenaline pushing me to keep running, to escape their clutches. Every step felt like an eternity, fear driving me forward. I finally found a secluded spot, hidden away, and crouched, trying to stifle my erratic breaths. Fear pulsed through my veins, my mind reeling from the chilling encounter. I stayed hidden, praying for daylight, for any sign of help in the desolate night. Minutes felt like hours as I remained frozen, waiting, hoping for dawn's arrival. The night seemed endless, silence enveloping the surroundings. But as the first light crept over the horizon, relief washed over me. Shaken and trembling, I gathered the courage to move, to find my way back to safety, vowing never to forget that night. I was on my way to visit family, a long drive ahead of me. The road seemed endless, and I needed a break from the monotony. That's when I saw what seemed like a shortcut, a smaller road cutting through the landscape. It felt like a good idea at the time. As I took the turn, the road gradually narrowed, becoming less traveled. The daylight started to wane, and a sense of isolation surrounded me. The gas gauge in my car dipped dangerously low. Anxiety began to creep in as I realized my impulsive shortcut might not have been the best decision. In the distance, a small diner emerged, its lights flickering against the dimming sky. It was my only hope for directions or a chance to refuel. As I approached, the neon open sign switched off, but I still pulled into the lot, hoping someone might still be around. A couple was locking up, their figures silhouetted against the diner's interior lights. I rushed to catch them, desperate for directions or any help they could offer. But as I approached, their demeanor struck me as odd. Their eyes bore into me, unwelcoming and almost hostile. I tried to ask for directions, but they simply stared, their expressions blank. The man, a burly figure with a stony face, finally spoke in a low, gruff voice. His words were curt, barely acknowledging my presence. I felt a chill run down my spine, an unsettling sensation at their peculiar behavior. The woman, equally eerie, remained silent, her gaze fixed on me, almost unblinking. It felt like they were sizing me up, studying me with a disturbing intensity. I asked again, desperation creeping into my voice, but their response was cryptic, almost dismissive. The air was thick with unease, and my instincts urged me to leave. But as I turned to head back to my car, they blocked my path. Their faces twisted into eerie smiles, revealing a set of unnaturally gleaming teeth. Fear gripped me, and I felt trapped, cornered by these strangers in the fading light. Their demeanor shifted, their voices turning icy as they spoke in unison. Their words were cryptic, foreboding a warning or a threat I couldn't discern. Panic surged through me, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stumbled back, trying to find an escape route. But their movements were too calculated, too precise. I felt a chilling realization that I was at their mercy, surrounded by their eerie presence in this desolate place. Their faces twisted into malicious grins, and I knew I had to get away, to break free from this eerie encounter. With a burst of adrenaline, I darted towards my car, fumbling for my keys, the sound of my heart drowning out everything else. I leaped inside and slammed the door shut, peeling out of the lot, leaving behind a cloud of dust. As I sped away, the couple's eerie stares haunted my thoughts, their cryptic words echoing in my mind. Fear and relief warred within me as I drove, my hands trembling on the wheel. It took miles before I dared to breathe again, before I felt a semblance of safety. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit town, surrounded by other people. The encounter had left me shaken. I remember that high school camping trip vividly, like it happened just yesterday. It was supposed to be a fun adventure with friends, sleeping under the stars, sharing stories around the campfire. But things took a turn the night my friend and I decided to explore beyond the campground, while everyone else was deep in sleep. The woods were different at night, darker, mysterious. The hushed conversations of the forest took on an ominous tone. We strayed farther than we intended, lured by the thrill of adventure and the allure of the unknown. But soon, the trees began to look unfamiliar, and the night seemed to swallow us whole. We exchanged nervous glances, realizing we were lost in the wilderness, far from the comfort and safety of our campsite. Panic fluttered in our chests as we tried to retrace our steps, but the darkness blurred the path we'd taken. Our attempts to find our way back only led us deeper into the labyrinth of trees. Then we stumbled upon a clearing, a small space in the woods that felt eerily desolate. The atmosphere was chilling, a heavy silence that weighed upon us. It was there that we saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a shadow in the darkness. He was tall, his face obscured by the night, and he didn't move or speak. We froze, the hairs on our necks prickling with unease. It felt like the forest itself held its breath. My friend whispered urgently, his voice barely audible, urging us to retreat slowly. But as we tried to edge backward, the figure took a step forward, then another. Fear rooted us to the spot, our hearts pounding in our chests. The silence was suffocating, our only sound the quickened breaths that echoed in the night. I remember the way his eyes gleamed, reflecting the scant moonlight. They seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto us with an unsettling intensity. We dared not speak or move, transfixed by this mysterious stranger who had materialized in the dead of night. Then, in a voice that sent shivers down our spines, he uttered a single word. It was a name, but not ours, a name that seemed foreign, ominous, as if it held a hidden meaning we couldn't grasp. It hung in the air, a haunting echo that reverberated through the silent woods. Fear propelled us into a desperate sprint, tearing through the underbrush, branches scratching our skin. We didn't dare look back, our only goal to flee from that chilling encounter, to find our way back to the safety of our camp. We stumbled and tripped, the darkness making the forest an obstacle course of unseen dangers. Fear consumed us, urging us to run faster, to escape the lingering presence of that mysterious figure in the woods. Finally, we broke through the trees, panting and breathless, the sight of our campsite a welcome relief. We collapsed near the tents, our friends startled awake by our frantic arrival. But we couldn't find the words to explain what had happened, our terror leaving us speechless. The rest of the night was a blur, filled with whispers of what we'd seen, what we'd felt. But in the safety of morning's light, it all seemed like a distant nightmare. We avoided the woods for the rest of the trip. I was on a crucial business trip, tasked with securing a deal that could make or break our company. The pressure was palpable, and I was determined to nail it. But fate had something entirely different in store. A wrong turn led to a series of events that still send shivers down my spine. It started innocently enough. I had my GPS programmed, all set to navigate me to the client's office. Except, I accidentally punched in the wrong address. It seemed okay at first, driving through what appeared to be small towns and vast fields. But the landscape gradually shifted, the familiarity of civilization fading away into desolation. I remember the GPS signaling I had reached my destination, but there was nothing. Just an endless stretch of deserted road and a sign indicating a town name I'd never heard before. There was an eerie silence hanging in the air, an unsettling stillness that didn't feel right. I needed gas to make it back and, spotting a small service station, I pulled in. The place seemed deserted, devoid of any customers or attendants. The only sign of life was a couple of locals who glanced at me with an unnerving intensity. As I fueled up, I noticed these folks, something about them felt off. Their mannerisms, their gazes, they seemed almost mechanical, like actors playing out their roles in a poorly scripted play. But the chilling part was the way they all seemed to move, in sync, as if sharing an unspoken understanding. I tried to shrug off the unease, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of the place. Yet, as I stepped inside to pay, the atmosphere grew even more suffocating. The few people there eyed me with an intensity that felt invasive, like they were peering into my soul. The cashier was an elderly man, his eyes glazed over with a distant look. When I asked for directions back to the main road, his response was a mere whisper, barely audible and cryptic. It felt like I was speaking to someone trapped in a different reality. The air grew colder, a creeping sense of foreboding settling in my bones. I wanted to leave, to escape the strange atmosphere that seemed to suffocate me, but I needed directions. So, I persisted, hoping for some semblance of normalcy in this bizarre town. As I stepped back outside, I noticed the locals had drawn closer, their expressions devoid of emotion, yet their eyes held an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I hurriedly made my way back to my car, feeling their stares follow my every move. And that's when it happened. One of them, the woman who'd been watching me with an intensity that felt predatory, stepped forward, her hand extending towards me. It was a gesture that seemed friendly at first, but as she drew closer, I noticed something glinting in her hand, a small, rusted knife. Fear gripped me, paralyzing my thoughts as I stumbled back. Adrenaline surged through my veins, urging me to flee, to escape this nightmarish scenario. Without another glance, I bolted, the sound of their murmurs and whispers echoing in my ears. I sped away from that forsaken town, heart pounding against my chest, pulse racing with an inexplicable terror. It was a whirlwind of panic and confusion, driving faster than I'd ever driven, away from that place that seemed to exist in another realm. When I finally reached familiar roads and signs of civilization, I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through me. I just had a great night in with my best friend. We laughed, reminisced, and had a blast. As it got late, she insisted I book a taxi to get home safe. I called for one, expecting a typical ride back to my place. The taxi arrived, a regular-looking sedan with a seemingly normal driver behind the wheel. I hopped in, telling him my address. He nodded and we set off, the night enveloping the streets in its usual quietness. But soon, something felt off. I noticed the driver taking unfamiliar turns, deviating from the usual route. I tried to brush it off, thinking he might know a shortcut or an alternative way to avoid traffic. But then another turn, and then another, and the feeling of unease started to sink in. I asked him where we were going, but he remained silent. That silence, that lack of response, it was chilling. My heart began to race, the streetlights passing by in a blur. Panic started creeping in, a sense of dread swirling in my gut. The street signs became unfamiliar, and the area we were in was deserted. There were no houses, no lights, just an eerie stillness that hung in the air. Fear surged through me, my instincts telling me something was very wrong. I demanded he stop and take me back, but he didn't acknowledge my words. His silence was deafening, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, ignoring my pleas. It felt like a horror movie playing out in real life, a surreal nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. With every passing minute, my fear intensified. I knew I had to do something, take control of the situation. I pressed the button to unlock the door, ready to make a run for it if I had to. As the car slowed at an intersection, I saw my chance. I flung the door open and bolted out, my heart pounding against my chest. Adrenaline fueled my legs as I sprinted away from the taxi, not daring to look back. I kept running, the darkness swallowing me whole. I didn't know where I was, but all I could think about was getting away. The fear of the unknown, the fear of being pursued, it was petrifying. Eventually, I stumbled upon a road and flagged down a passing car, begging for help. The driver, a kind soul, offered me a ride back to town. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, grateful to have escaped the terrifying ordeal. When I finally arrived home, I locked every door and window, trembling from the adrenaline and fear that still coursed through my veins. I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread, the haunting thought of what could have happened. That night lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of how quickly things can spiral into terror. I'd been looking forward to this getaway for ages. A remote cabin nestled deep in the woods, the perfect place to find solitude and finally start writing that novel I've been dreaming of. The host seemed friendly, the reviews promising seclusion and tranquility. As I arrived, the cabin appeared just as picturesque as the photos portrayed. The air was crisp, the forest around me alive with the sounds of nature. I unpacked, settled in, and as the day waned, I sat down at the old wooden desk, ready to bring my story to life. But soon, peculiar things began to happen. Footsteps outside my window when I knew I was alone. The sensation of being watched, an inexplicable unease that settled in. I brushed it off as nerves, the unfamiliarity of being in such a remote place. Nightfall brought a sense of isolation. The silence of the woods was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. It was serene, yet somehow ominous. As I sat at the desk, typing away, a chill ran down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see nothing but darkness outside. But through the window, I caught a glimpse of someone or something moving among the trees. My heart raced as I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the shadows. Yet, when I looked again, a figure stood there, just beyond the reach of the cabin's light. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Fear gripped me, but I told myself it was my imagination, that it was probably a trick of the light. I forced myself to focus on my work, hoping it was just the stress of being in an unfamiliar place. But then came the sound of footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I held my breath, trying to convince myself that it was just a stray animal or the wind. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate or hide. I summoned all my courage and slowly made my way to the door, trying to ignore the pounding of my heart. I peeked through the peephole, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness of the night. Relief washed over me until I heard a soft whisper, barely audible. My blood turned to ice. I strained to listen, my heart thundering in my chest. The voice, almost ghostly, muttered something incomprehensible, chilling me to the bone. I stepped back, my breath shallow, my mind racing. I couldn't stay there, not with this unnerving presence. I locked the door and drew the curtains, trying to ward off the unease settling in. But the night dragged on, the hours ticking by slowly. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sent shivers down my spine. I felt like a character in a horror movie, trapped and vulnerable. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But as I glanced at the window, I saw a face pressed against the glass, a pale, featureless visage, staring directly at me. I screamed, my body trembling, and backed away. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone was there, watching me, their eyes fixed on mine. The figure slowly faded into the darkness, leaving me terrified and alone. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained the chilling encounter. But when they arrived, they found no one around. They assured me it was probably just a prank or some wildlife roaming the woods. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense of dread that lingered long after they left. I packed my things and left that cabin in a rush, never looking back. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or who or what it was. That experience haunted me. We were on a family road trip, cruising through the stunning Scottish countryside. The landscape was breathtaking, but our GPS went haywire, and roadworks forced us off our planned route. We found ourselves on winding country roads, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods, feeling a little lost but enjoying the adventure. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the roads grew narrower and isolated. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. The tranquility of the surroundings soon turned eerie, especially as the evening crept in. Our youngest dozed off in the back seat, exhausted from the day's excitement. My wife was studying the outdated map we picked up at a gas station, trying to find our bearings. The tension in the air increased as the roads became less familiar, our GPS useless in these remote areas. Suddenly, we rounded a bend and came to a stop. A sign indicated a road closure, forcing us to take an unplanned turn down an even more desolate path. It felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. We ventured on, the road growing increasingly desolate, lined with tall trees that seemed to swallow the remaining light. Anxiety started to build within me. We were off the grid, without phone signal or any sign of civilization. Then, in the distance, I spotted a figure. A man stood by the roadside, his silhouette barely visible in the fading light. He seemed to be waiting, motionless, almost eerie against the backdrop of the lonely road. As we approached, my wife hesitated, glancing at me with concern. I slowed the car, debating whether to stop. His presence felt off, out of place in this isolated setting. The man's appearance was unsettling. He wore old, tattered clothes and had a wild, unkempt beard. But what struck me most were his eyes, dark and intense, fixed on us as if he'd been waiting for our arrival. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, an instinctive unease that something wasn't right. I wanted to drive past him, ignore the sense of foreboding, but something compelled me to stop. Rolling down the window just a fraction, I asked if he needed help or directions. His response was a chilling silence. He didn't acknowledge my question, instead staring at us with an unsettling intensity. My wife urged me to keep driving, her voice fraught with concern, but my curiosity and a lingering sense of obligation made me press for an answer. I asked again if he needed assistance, but he remained eerily silent. The atmosphere grew tense, the air heavy with an unspoken threat. My instinct screamed at me to drive away, to leave this strange encounter behind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. My wife's voice quivered as she begged me to move on, to leave this unnerving stranger behind. I finally listened to her pleas and accelerated away, leaving the man standing by the roadside, his intense gaze lingering in my mind. As we drove off, a wave of relief washed over us. But the feeling of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we'd narrowly avoided something sinister, something beyond our understanding. We continued our journey in silence, the encounter with the mysterious man haunting our thoughts. Though we never encountered him again, the memory of that chilling moment stayed with us, casting a shadow over our picturesque holiday in Scotland. I was out on the open road, thumb outstretched, hoping for a lift. It was getting late, and the town I needed to reach was still miles away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my chances of catching a ride seemed to dwindle. Then, luck finally seemed to favor me. An old, battered car slowed down and pulled over. The driver, a middle-aged man with a worn expression, offered a lift. Grateful, I hopped in, thanking my stars for this stroke of fortune. At first, everything seemed normal. The man behind the wheel was taciturn, but I chalked it up to him being reserved. The car rumbled along the deserted roads, and I relaxed, glad to be on my way to town. But as the miles ticked by, something felt off. The man didn't seem to be heading toward the town. The familiar road signs were missing, replaced by desolate, unfamiliar landscapes. Anxiety crept in, coiling in the pit of my stomach. I mustered the courage to ask the driver about the route. His response was cryptic, evasive. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. Panic began to set in, the realization sinking in that I might be in danger. I pleaded with him to turn around, my voice quivering with fear, but he remained stoic, driving further away from civilization. The isolation was palpable, suffocating, and I knew I had to act fast. Summoning all my courage, I demanded that he stop the car and let me out. His silence unnerved me. It felt deliberate, calculated. When he finally stopped, we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but darkness and eerie silence. The air felt thick with menace as he turned to me, his expression unreadable. I could sense danger emanating from him, a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. He asked me to get out of the car, his voice chillingly calm. I hesitated, the primal instinct of self-preservation warning me of the impending threat. But I knew I had to escape this ominous situation. With trembling hands, I opened the door and stepped out onto the deserted road. That's when things took a terrifying turn. The man's demeanor changed, his calm facade giving way to a sinister grin. He lunged towards me, and adrenaline surged through my veins as I bolted away from the car, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, panic gripping every fiber of my being as I sprinted through the darkness, my breaths ragged and labored. I dared not look back, my focus solely on putting as much distance as possible between me and that man. The adrenaline-fueled escape was my only priority, and the darkness around me felt like an abyss, swallowing any hope of finding help. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear propelled me forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a faint light in the distance. A flickering lamp on the porch of a remote cabin provided a glimmer of hope. I raced toward it, knocking frantically on the door, pleading for help. A kind stranger opened the door, and I poured out the terrifying encounter I just faced. They called the authorities, offering me refuge until help arrived. I felt a flood of relief wash over me, knowing I was safe, rescued from the clutches of a potential predator. The police arrived, and I recounted the chilling tale to them. They assured me they'd investigate and try to locate the man in his car. It was a long, harrowing night, filled with fear and uncertainty. It was a night I would never forget. I had been exploring these trails for hours, enjoying the quiet solitude of the woods. But then, I took a turn, hoping it would lead back to the main trail. Instead, it led me deeper into the woods, to a part one hadn't seen before. As I rode on, the trees seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer. It felt strange, like the atmosphere had shifted. Then, I noticed someone standing ahead, a man, just at the edge of the trail. He seemed out of place, standing there silently. I approached, hoping maybe he knew the way back. But as I got closer, this unease settled in. There was something off about him, this feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried to smile and asked if he knew the way back to the main trail. He didn't respond, just stared at me with this intense, almost unsettling gaze. It made my skin crawl. I felt this urge to leave, to turn back, but something held me there. The man seemed to step closer, this slow, deliberate movement that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't want to be rude, but I couldn't shake off this feeling that I needed to get away. I muttered some excuse about needing to get back and turned my bike around. As I rode away, I felt this sense of relief, but the unease lingered. I glanced back, and he was still there, watching me with that intense stare. I pedaled faster, wanting to put as much distance between us as possible. But then, I heard his footsteps behind me. I dared not look back, fear gripping me as I rode faster, my heart racing. I finally made it to a familiar path, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. I looked back, but there was no sign of a man. The relief was immense, but the encounter left me shaken. The feeling of being watched stayed with me, this sense that he was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It made my skin prickle, this fear that I couldn't shake off. I left, but the memory of that strange man lingered. It was like a shadow that followed me, this sense of unease that haunted my thoughts. The woods seemed different now, every rustle making me jump, every shadow making me wary. I was driving down this desolate road, the kind where there's more silence than sound. My car started acting up, sputtering and choking, and then it just died. No warning. Nothing. I tried starting it up again and again, but it was like the engine had just given up on me. And to make things worse, there was no cell service. Not a single bar. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness that was closing in fast. Panic started creeping up on me, that gnawing feeling of being stranded, alone, and vulnerable. Night fell like a heavy curtain, the sky turning pitch black. I couldn't see beyond the range of my headlights. The only sound was the eerie howl of the wind as it swept through the trees. I locked all the doors, feeling this overwhelming sense of being watched. I tried to keep myself busy, checking the engine, hoping it was just something minor. But I couldn't shake this feeling that I wasn't alone. Every rustle of the wind made me jump, my heart racing with fear. I sat there in the car, trying to distract myself with music, anything to drown out the silence. But it didn't work. The darkness seemed to press against the windows, and I felt this chill crawl down my spine. Then, I heard it, a twig snapping, a sound that shouldn't have been there. I strained my ears, hoping it was just an animal, something harmless. But then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer to the car. Fear paralyzed me. I turned off the music, trying to listen, but the silence was deafening. My mind raced with scenarios, all of them terrifying. I was on edge, every nerve tingling with anticipation. And then, a shadow passed in front of the headlights. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Someone was out there. I didn't know who or what they wanted. I just knew I wasn't safe. I locked the car doors, feeling this sense of impending doom. I wanted to scream for help, but I was too terrified to make a sound. I clutched my phone, hoping for a signal, but it was useless. I sat there, waiting, praying for daylight to come soon. Every little sound outside made me jump. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that there was a logical explanation. But then, a voice, hushed and chilling, whispered from outside the car. "You're not alone." It sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't see who it was, but I could feel their presence, this malevolent aura hanging in the air. I was trapped, surrounded by darkness and the unknown. I felt helpless, vulnerable. And then, there was a knock on the window, slow and deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't dare look. I cowered in the back seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. The knocking continued, each tap sending shockwaves of terror through me. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I was at the mercy of whoever was outside. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity. The knocking eventually stopped, but the fear remained, this lingering dread that I wasn't safe. I was too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. When dawn finally broke, I mustered up the courage to peek out. There was no one there. Just an empty road, surrounded by a desolate landscape. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed what I could and started running, leaving the broken down car behind. I didn't stop until I reached civilization, until I saw other people, until I felt safe again. I never found out who or what was out there that night. I had been hiking this trail for hours, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of nature. The forest was dense, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves were my companions. But then, I took a wrong turn, hoping it would loop back to the main trail. Instead, it led me deeper into the woods, to a part one hadn't seen before. At first, it seemed okay, just a different path to explore. But as I continued, something felt off. The trees seemed to close in on me, the trail becoming narrower and less defined. The sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, making it hard to see. I kept walking, hoping I'd find my way back soon, but the woods seemed endless. Panic started to creep in, that gnawing feeling of being lost. I tried retracing my steps, but everything looked the same: trees, rocks, bushes, all blending into an indistinguishable blur. As the sun began to set, I realized I was truly lost. The panic rose in my chest. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. It was just me, alone in the woods, with no signs of civilization in sight. Night fell fast, and the forest turned into a different world. Every shadow seemed darker, every rustle sounded ominous. I could barely see ahead of me, stumbling over roots and branches in the darkness. I tried to make a makeshift shelter, hoping to wait it out until morning. But the forest seemed alive with strange noises, the rustling of leaves, the distant howl of some animal. Fear clawed at me, this feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond my sight. I hugged my knees, trying to calm my racing heart. I heard footsteps, or at least I thought I did. Every little sound made me jump, made me paranoid. I felt like I was being followed. I couldn't sleep. I sat there, listening to the night, feeling this overwhelming sense of vulnerability. I had no idea where I was or how to get back. When dawn finally broke, relief flooded through me. But that relief was short-lived when I realized I was still lost. I stood up, hoping to find my way out in the daylight, but the woods seemed different in the morning, eerier, more foreboding. I walked, trying to keep calm, but the forest seemed intent on keeping me trapped. Every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into the unknown. As hours passed, exhaustion set in. I hadn't eaten properly, hadn't had water for hours. I felt weak and disoriented. I screamed for help, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. I began to lose hope, feeling this overwhelming sense of despair. I was alone, lost in this vast, unforgiving wilderness. The fear intensified with every passing hour. I stumbled upon a clearing, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the distance. It was enough to send me running, fear driving me to keep moving, to keep searching for a way out. The day stretched into night again, and the cycle repeated: fear, panic, and an endless search for a way back. I was cold, hungry, and exhausted, pushed to my limits both physically and mentally. I tried to mark my path, breaking twigs, making arrows on the ground, anything to guide me back. But everything seemed to change whenever I looked back, trails I hadn't taken, trees that seemed familiar now seemed foreign. I was losing hope, resigned to the fact that I might never find my way out. The fear had become a constant companion, a chilling reminder that I was alone and vulnerable in this vast, untamed wilderness. Days passed, and I was on the brink of giving up when, by some miracle, I stumbled upon a familiar trail. Relief flooded through me as I followed it, weak but determined. When I finally emerged from the woods, I collapsed, exhausted and trembling. It was over, the nightmare of being lost in those unforgiving woods. We were just a group of friends, excited about our expedition into the wild. It was supposed to be an adventure, a bonding experience. But things took a turn. The forest was vast, trees towering over us like silent sentinels. We had maps and supplies, but somehow we got separated. One by one, we drifted apart, each left to fend for ourselves. I remember the sense of disorientation, the panic rising as I realized I was alone. The trees seemed to shift, the trails vanished, and every direction felt like the wrong one. The woods that once felt inviting now felt suffocating. The sun dipped lower, casting eerie shadows. The sounds of rustling leaves became menacing. Every snap of a twig made my heart race. I tried calling out for my friends, but my voice seemed swallowed by the wilderness. Night fell faster than expected, and I found myself scrambling to set up camp. The darkness was thick, suffocating. Every noise felt amplified, like the forest was alive and watching me. My flashlight became my lifeline, but its dim beam did little to ease my fear. I tried to tell myself it was just the forest playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard footsteps, faint but distinct, pacing around my campsite. I froze, holding my breath, hoping it was just an animal. But there was something too deliberate about those steps. I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed ominous, a twig snapping, leaves rustling. And then there were whispers, indistinct, almost inaudible. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be out there. Was it another lost hiker, or something more sinister? Morning came, but the relief was short-lived. The others were still missing. I pushed forward, hoping to stumble upon them, but the woods seemed to twist and turn, leading me astray. As the day wore on, the forest seemed to play tricks on me. Shadows danced around, shapes moved in the corner of my eye. I felt this constant feeling of being watched. I came across strange markings on the trees, symbols I didn't recognize. They sent shivers down my spine. I tried to push deeper into the woods, hoping to find a way out, but every path led to nowhere. The day turned to dusk, and my unease grew. The woods became even more oppressive, the air heavy with an inexplicable dread. I felt eyes on me, unseen and unsettling. Then, there was that moment when I heard my name being whispered from the darkness. Clear and distinct, as if someone was just behind the trees. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the echoes of my own name lingering in the air. Fear consumed me. I was disoriented, lost, and terrified. I huddled in a makeshift shelter, praying for daylight, for rescue, for anything. The night was long, each passing moment feeling like an eternity. Every noise sent me into a panic. I was alone, vulnerable, and at the mercy of the wilderness. When dawn finally broke, I stumbled upon a trail. I followed it, desperate for an escape. And that's when I found the others, equally shaken and lost. We clung together, relieved to have found each other. We never spoke much about our time alone in those woods. It was getting late, and I was on my way home. I thought I knew the shortcuts like the back of my hand, but this time I took a wrong turn. The road seemed unfamiliar, twisting and winding through barren landscapes. No signs, no familiar landmarks, just desolation. My heart sank as the sun dipped lower, casting long, eerie shadows. I tried to turn back, but the road seemed endless, stretching on and on into the unknown. Panic began creeping in. I was lost, in a place I couldn't recognize. The desolate area felt like a forgotten corner of the world. No lights, no houses, just an empty expanse. I tried to keep calm, reassuring myself that I'd find my way. But the road seemed to lead deeper into this isolated abyss. As darkness fell, I could barely see beyond the reach of my headlights. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own breaths. I rolled down my window, hoping to hear something, anything that might guide me. But there was only the stillness of the night. I checked my phone for a signal, but there was nothing, just an empty bar. My heart raced as the reality sank in. I was completely cut off from the world, stranded in a place that felt forgotten. I took a deep breath, trying to think straight. I had to find a way out. But the road stretched on endlessly, and the sense of isolation grew heavier. Every turn seemed to lead to nowhere, each pathway feeling more desolate than the last. The trees loomed over me, their branches casting ominous silhouettes. I drove on, hoping for a sign of civilization. Hours passed, and fatigue gnawed at me. The silence was oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pushed on, hoping for a turn, a landmark, anything. Suddenly, the engine sputtered, and my car came to a stop. I tried to restart it, but it was dead. Panic surged through me. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness and silence. I grabbed my phone and got out, hoping to find a signal. But there was nothing, just an empty void where there should have been connectivity. The night seemed to swallow me whole, and the eerie stillness intensified. My steps echoed on the empty road as I walked, trying to find some semblance of civilization. But the area remained desolate, barren, as if it was a place untouched by time itself. That's when I heard it, a faint noise, like whispers carried on the wind. I froze, straining my ears to catch any sound, but it was gone as quickly as it came. My heart pounded in my chest, and a chill ran down my spine. I picked up my pace, desperation pushing me forward. I had to find help, to escape this desolate maze. But the road seemed endless, a loop that refused to lead me out. Then, I saw a faint light in the distance. Relief washed over me, and I hurried toward it, hoping it was a house, a gas station, anything. As I approached, the light flickered and disappeared. Confusion and fear swept over me. I turned back, but the road had changed, twisting in unfamiliar ways. It felt like the landscape itself was playing tricks on me. I felt a presence, an unnerving sensation of being observed. My breaths came in short, sharp gasps. I called out for help, my voice echoing into the emptiness, but there was no response. I ran now, desperation fueling every step. I had to escape this desolate place. But the road seemed endless, looping and winding in ways that made no sense. I stumbled upon an old, decrepit signboard, weathered by time and barely legible. It bore an unfamiliar name, a place that didn't exist on any map I'd seen. The air grew colder, heavier. It was as if the place itself was warning me to turn back. But I had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn. I found an old, abandoned structure, broken, decrepit, a shadow of what it might have been. I hesitated, but desperation urged me to seek shelter. I pushed the creaky door open, its hinges protesting against the intrusion. The interior was dark, musty, and cold. I fumbled for my phone, hoping its feeble light would reveal something. But the dim glow only cast elongated shadows, intensifying the sense of foreboding. I heard whispers again, soft and menacing, seeming to come from the very walls of the structure. Fear gripped me, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I felt trapped, surrounded by something intangible yet suffocatingly real. I pressed on, searching for a way out, a way back to familiarity. But the walls seemed to shift, the passages changing, leading me deeper into the unknown. I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I bolted, stumbling in the darkness, trying to find an exit. But the structure seemed to have a life of its own, leading me in circles. I reached what seemed like the heart of the structure, a dimly lit room, the air heavy with a sense of malevolence. Shadows danced on the walls, shapes contorting in an eerie dance. I felt a presence, an unseen force, closing in on me. I tried to scream, to fight against this suffocating fear, but my voice failed me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The darkness lifted, the whispers faded, and the silence returned. I found myself standing at the entrance of the structure. The desolate road stretched out before me. I ran, not daring to look back, fueled by the need to escape that place, to leave it far behind. I found my car where I left it, and with trembling hands, I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, leaving that desolate area behind. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, just the two of us in a cozy cabin tucked away from the world. We found this place online, pictures of a charming cabin nestled in the woods, promising peace and tranquility. But as we drove deeper into the forest, the road grew narrower, more isolated, until there wasn't a single soul in sight. The cabin looked nothing like the pictures, ramshackle, aged, with paint peeling off its wooden exterior. We brushed it off, assuming it was rustic charm, but unease settled in as we unloaded our bags. The isolation was stifling. No phone signal, no neighbors for miles. We tried to make the best of it, lighting up the fireplace and settling in. But there was something unsettling about the quietness, the way the forest seemed to swallow any sound. As night fell, things got weirder. Creaks and groans echoed through the cabin, as if the old wood was alive. The wind whispered through the trees, creating an eerie symphony that sent shivers down my spine. We brushed off the sounds, telling ourselves it was just an old cabin settling. But then, we heard footsteps outside, crunching on the gravel. My heart raced, and I clutched onto my partner, who tried to reassure me it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But these footsteps were deliberate, methodical. We peeked through the window, but there was nothing there, just the darkness of the woods. Fear settled in, and we locked every door and window, our nerves on edge. That night, strange things happened. The lights flickered, and shadows seemed to move in the corners of our vision. My partner said it was just faulty wiring, but the air felt charged with something unknown. I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. And then, a tapping sound, rhythmic, almost like a signal. My partner was fast asleep, but I lay there, frozen, listening to the unnerving beat that seemed to echo through the walls. Morning brought no solace. We found scratches on the cabin door, deep gashes that looked like claw marks. Panic set in, but we rationalized it, attributing it to wildlife or someone playing a prank. We ventured into the woods during the day, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches twisting into eerie shapes. The silence was deafening, only interrupted by our footsteps on the forest floor. When we returned, things only got worse. Items went missing: a book, a flashlight, little things that we put down just moments ago. We searched the entire cabin, but they were nowhere to be found. It was as if the cabin itself was playing tricks on us. Then, there were the whispers, faint murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. We couldn't make out the words, just a haunting jumble of sounds that sent shivers down our spines. My partner tried to stay optimistic, suggesting it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched, observed by something unseen. Nightfall brought no respite. Shadows danced on the walls, elongated and twisted into shapes that seemed almost human. The wind outside howled, carrying whispers that seemed to seep into the cabin. We decided to leave. Packing frantically, we made for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as if someone or something was holding it shut. Panic set in. We tried every window, but they were jammed too. We were trapped, cut off from the outside world, with the eerie whispers growing louder, reverberating through the cabin. I felt a presence, a chilling sensation that made my skin crawl. My partner tried to comfort me, but their voice seemed distant, drowned out by the unnerving cacophony. And then, silence. The whispers ceased, the shadows stilled. It was as if the world outside the cabin had disappeared. We sat there, huddled together, waiting for something, anything to happen. But time stretched on, and the silence became suffocating, a void that swallowed us whole. When morning finally broke, we found the door and windows wide open. There were no scratches, no signs of the eerie occurrences of the night before. It was as if it had never happened. We packed our things, not daring to look back. As we drove away from that secluded cabin, the forest seemed to release its grip, the world outside the woods returning to normalcy. We thought we had it all figured out, a weekend fishing trip with the gang. But then, the fog rolled in thick and fast, swallowing our surroundings like a white wall. Our boat bobbed aimlessly on the water, no landmarks in sight. Panic sparked among us, the jovial atmosphere turning tense. We ventured further than planned, hoping for the perfect spot, but now, the heavy fog had us disoriented. We tried retracing our path, but it was no use. The dense mist made it impossible to discern direction. Unease set in as the hours passed, the fog refusing to lift. The water seemed to whisper eerie secrets, and our jokes turned into nervous laughter, disguising the growing fear. The eeriness was suffocating. Sounds carried strangely in the mist, amplified yet muffled. The air was thick with a strange stillness, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. Our GPS malfunctioned, spinning wildly without finding our location. Anxiety tightened its grip as we huddled together, trying to stay calm, but the fog seemed to devour any reassurance. As night descended, the fog took on a sinister tone. Shapes danced on the water's surface, distorted and shifting. The soft lap of the waves became ominous, a rhythm that echoed our escalating fear. Our boat drifted, aimless in the murky abyss. We tried calling for help, but our cries seemed to dissipate into the fog, unanswered. We were alone, lost in a world of swirling gray. The darkness thickened, the fog swallowing our lantern's light. It felt like we were adrift in an alternate reality, cut off from the world we knew. Our conversations dwindled into fearful whispers, our eyes straining to catch any hint of land. But there was nothing, just the fog's relentless embrace. Time became indiscernible, minutes stretching into hours. Anxiety gnawed at us, our imaginations running wild. We thought we heard voices, distant calls that sent shivers down our spines. We clung to hope, trying to keep our fears in check, but the fog seemed to seep into our bones, a chilling reminder of our vulnerability. A sense of dread settled over us, a premonition of something lurking in the mist. Every ripple on the water made us flinch, every shadow felt like a threat. Then, a sudden jolt rocked our boat. Panic surged through us as we struggled to keep our balance. Had we hit something? Was it a creature beneath the surface? Fear paralyzed us, our thoughts spiraling into the unknown. We tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Frantic attempts yielded nothing but silence, the boat adrift in an unyielding sea of fog. The air grew colder, chilling us to the bone. It was as if the fog had a life of its own, closing in around us with an almost suffocating embrace. In the distance, a shape loomed, barely discernible through the thick mist. Fear gripped us as we strained to make out what it was, a vessel, a figure, or just a trick of the fog. Tension mounted as the shape drew closer. It was a boat, another vessel lost in the fog. Relief flooded through us, but our relief was short-lived. The boat drew closer, its appearance more unsettling with each passing second. It was aged, tattered, and empty, adrift just like ours. Then, from the fog emerged a sound, a haunting melody carried by the wind, mournful and chilling. It made the hair on our necks stand on end. Panic consumed us, our instincts screaming to flee. We huddled together, trying to make sense of the inexplicable horror unfolding before us. As quickly as it appeared, the haunting sound faded into the fog. The other boat vanished, swallowed by the mist once more. We were alone again, the fog thickening around us. We had no choice but to wait, our hearts pounding in sync with the eerie silence. Hours dragged by, the fog a relentless shroud that refused to relent. We held onto each other, praying for daylight to break through the dense veil. When dawn finally broke, the fog lifted, revealing our surroundings. We were far from our intended route, the shoreline distant but visible. Relief washed over us as we steered our boat back, escaping the fog's sinister grip. It was my first night on the job. A security officer at a warehouse tucked in the eerie outskirts of the city. A friend hooked me up with the gig, easy pay, quiet nights, or so I thought. They handed me the keys, a flashlight, and a rundown of the routine. Simple patrol, check the locks, keep an eye out for any unusual activity. I wasn't expecting much action. The warehouse stood stoic under the moonlit sky, casting long shadows that danced with the occasional gust of wind. It was quiet, almost unsettlingly so. I walked the perimeter, making rounds with my flashlight in hand, trying to shake off the jitters of starting a new job in such an isolated place. Hours crept by, and the silence pressed in like a weight. Then, around midnight, things took a turn. I spotted 3 figures lurking near the back gate, their silhouettes moving in sync with the swaying trees. My heart thudded against my chest. What were they doing here in the dead of night? I approached cautiously, hoping it was just a mix-up, but my gut churned with unease. As I drew closer, they turned towards me, their faces shrouded in darkness. The air felt heavy, charged with tension. I called out, trying to sound firm, demanding to know why they were here. No answer, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. A flicker of movement, and suddenly they were gone. Vanished into thin air. I swept the area with my flashlight, heart racing, but there was no trace of them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I retreated back to the security office, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, my imagination running wild in the desolation of the night. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. And as the hours ticked by, paranoia clawed at me. Then, as if taunting my fears, the surveillance cameras glitched. Screens flickered to life, displaying corridors where no one should be. Footsteps echoed through the monitors, but when I checked, the halls remained empty. I radioed for backup, but static was my only response. I was alone. Every creak and shuffle in that warehouse felt magnified, sending shivers down my spine. It was like the place itself was alive, watching, waiting. The night dragged on, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the power cut out. Pitch darkness swallowed the warehouse, leaving me stranded in the black. My flashlight barely pierced the thick shadows. I heard whispers, distant murmurs that seemed to come from all directions. My pulse thundered in my ears as I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any sign of life. But the battery had drained to nothing, leaving me utterly isolated. Then, a chilling sensation crept up my spine. A presence, unmistakable, watching from the darkness. I swung my flashlight wildly, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just a suffocating silence and an overwhelming feeling of dread. Hours passed in that eerie void, time stretching and warping with my mounting fear. I felt exposed, vulnerable in that vast, unyielding darkness. I was nothing but a small speck in the abyss. As the first light of dawn seeped through the windows, the power flickered back on. I wasted no time, gathering my things and bolting out of there, leaving the haunting whispers and oppressive silence behind. I never looked back. My first shift became my last. The warehouse loomed in my rearview mirror, a shadowy silhouette against the sunrise. But the memory of those three figures and the creeping terror of that night stayed etched in my mind. That job taught me one thing: some encounters, some experiences, they're better left unexplained, forgotten in the depths of the night. I live in this quiet, secluded place, where the closest neighbor is miles away. Nights here are silent, serene even. But one night, something changed, unsettling the peace I'd grown accustomed to. It started with a sound, barely audible at first, like a distant shuffle. I brushed it off, attributing it to the wind or some stray animal. But the noise persisted, growing louder, closer. My heart quickened its pace, sensing something amiss. The faint echo of footsteps outside my home sent shivers down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the growing sense of dread made it impossible to ignore. I strained to listen, the quiet of the night amplifying every sound. The footsteps were unmistakable now, deliberate and purposeful. Panic surged within me as I realized there was an intruder lurking just beyond the walls of my sanctuary. Fear paralyzed me, rendering me incapable of moving. I was trapped, alone and vulnerable. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what to do next. Should I call for help? Should I confront the intruder? The sound drew nearer, right outside my window now. My breaths came in short, erratic gasps. I had no idea who or what was out there, and that uncertainty was the most terrifying aspect. I could hear muffled voices, whispers that made no sense, a chilling combination of gibberish and threats. I felt a primal fear clawing at my chest. My instinct screamed at me to lock every door, to hide, to protect myself. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a heavy flashlight, my knuckles turning white around it. It was my feeble attempt at defense, a meager barrier between me and the unknown intruder. The moment of truth arrived when the doorknob rattled, followed by a sinister scratching sound. I braced myself, heart pounding in my ears. The door creaked open slowly, almost mockingly, revealing a sliver of darkness from the outside. I stood there, frozen, staring into the abyss of the doorway. Then, footsteps audible, distinct, and coming closer. The sound was terrifyingly close now, just on the other side of the door frame. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. I was consumed by fear, unsure of what awaited me. The darkness outside seemed to swallow any semblance of safety that I had. And then, as suddenly as it began, the footsteps retreated. Silence engulfed the room, deafening in its own right. I was left in a state of petrified uncertainty, grappling with the horror of the intrusion and the lingering dread of not knowing who it was or why they had come. I hesitated before approaching the door, my breath shallow and labored. I mustered the courage to peek outside, but there was nothing, no sign of the intruder, no trace of their presence. The night eventually regained its quietude, leaving me to confront the unsettling aftermath of that encounter. I felt violated, a deep sense of unease settling in. Who had been there? What had they wanted? Sleep that night was an elusive companion. Every creak, every rustle made me jump. I couldn't shake off the feeling that the intruder might return, that the nightmare wasn't over. As dawn broke, I inspected the perimeter, looking for any clue that might explain the intrusion. but there was nothing, no trace or evidence to make sense of the ordeal. I considered reporting it to the authorities, but without any tangible proof, it felt futile. I was left with the chilling realization that I was alone in this, vulnerable and exposed to whatever threat had lurked outside my door that night. Days passed, but the experience lingered, a haunting memory that tainted the serenity of my remote abode. I installed security measures, double-checked locks, and remained vigilant, forever changed by that terrifying night. The incident remained an unsolved mystery, a chilling reminder of the vulnerability that comes with solitude in such desolate places. I'm an officer, and there's this one call that sticks with me, a night I'll never forget. It was a routine disturbance call, just another typical night on the job, or so I thought. Dispatch buzzed in, reported a disturbance out in the woods, far off the beaten path. I'm familiar with the area, dense trees and wilderness stretching for miles, not a place you'd expect trouble. But duty calls, so I made my way there, headlights slicing through the darkness as I navigated the winding roads. The further I drove, the more remote it became. The woods seemed to swallow up any trace of civilization, leaving behind an eerie silence. The radio crackled with updates from dispatch, but there was an odd static, almost like interference. It gave me a shiver, a premonition that this call wasn't going to be straightforward. I parked my cruiser on the edge of the woods and ventured into the darkness. The path was narrow, barely visible, moonlight barely filtering through the dense canopy overhead. The deeper I went, the more I felt the weight of the night closing in around me. Then, a rustling sound, faint at first, like twigs snapping underfoot. My hand went instinctively to my holster, fingers gripping the familiar cold metal of my service weapon. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, every sense on high alert. I moved cautiously, every step echoing in the silence. There was a commotion up ahead, voices. They sounded strained, almost panicked. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The voices grew louder as I approached, intermingled with an odd murmuring, a low chant that sent chills down my spine. I inched closer, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before me. And then I saw it, a circle of people, figures shrouded in the gloom, their movements erratic, almost frenzied. I couldn't make out their faces, just dark silhouettes swaying in an unsettling rhythm. The air was thick with something, a scent that made my stomach churn. It was metallic, a hint of something acrid and pungent. My training kicked in, telling me to call for backup, but the interference on the radio persisted. I had to get closer to understand what was happening. But the closer I got, the more I felt a chill creeping up my spine. The people in the circle were chanting, their voices rising in a disturbing crescendo. It wasn't a language I recognized, more like a guttural chant that sent shivers down my spine. As I approached, the chanting ceased abruptly, the sudden silence jarring. I felt eyes on me, dozens of them, though I couldn't discern their sources in the darkness. The figures turned toward me in unison, and a cold dread gripped my chest. I called out, identified myself as an officer, but the response was something altogether unnerving. Their faces were obscured, shrouded in shadow or hidden behind masks, distorted, twisted masks that looked almost ritualistic. I felt like an intruder in some forbidden ritual, a witness to something beyond comprehension. And then they scattered, melting into the woods like phantoms. The circle was empty, silent once more. My mind reeled, trying to process what I just witnessed. Fear pulsed through me, a raw, primal fear that I couldn't shake. I backed away, stumbling over roots and rocks in my haste to leave that place. Back at the cruiser, I tried the radio again, but the interference persisted. It was as if the woods themselves were conspiring against communication, leaving me isolated and alone. I reported what I'd seen, but my own words sounded hollow, impossible even to my own ears. I couldn't explain it, the twisted figures, the strange chanting, the chilling masks. That night haunts me, a vivid memory that's impossible to forget. I've been trained for the unimaginable, but that night I encountered something beyond the scope of rational explanation, something that defies logic or reason. I must have dozed off on the couch again. You know how it is, just watching TV late at night, drifting away without even realizing it. But when I opened my eyes, it wasn't my living room I saw. The TV wasn't there, the familiar walls were gone. Panic seized me instantly, that gut-wrenching terror that knots your insides. I was in a cabin, deep in the woods. How did I get here? What happened? I couldn't recall a thing. The air felt different, stuffy, heavy. The room was dimly lit by a flickering lamp, shadows dancing ominously. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding so loud I swear I could hear it echoing in the silence. It was a small place, run down, the kind you'd see in old horror movies. I didn't recognize anything, and that only added to the terror creeping up my spine. The door was locked, bolted shut. The windows were no help either, just blackness beyond them, like staring into an endless void. It felt like a nightmare, but every time I pinched myself, the nightmare just got worse. I had to get out, find some semblance of reality. I searched frantically for a way, scrambling through my mind for any clue, any memory that could anchor me. But it was all blank, an empty canvas. I mustered every ounce of courage, every shred of hope, and forced the door open. Fresh air hit me, a brief moment of relief. But it didn't last. As I stepped outside, terror took hold once more. The woods were dense, an impenetrable wall of darkness. Fear whispered in the rustling leaves, in the howling wind. I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate. My heart thundered in my chest as I ran, fueled by primal instinct, by sheer terror. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from that cabin, away from whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. The woods were disorienting, a maze of shadows and tangled branches. I tripped, stumbled, felt branches clawing at my skin. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of them right behind me. I dared to glance back and saw a figure, a man, pursuing me with relentless determination. His face was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel his intent, his malice. I ran faster, the adrenaline masking the pain in my lungs, the agony in my legs. Fear was my fuel now, pushing me beyond my limits. But no matter how hard I tried, he was right there, closing the gap. I didn't know where I was heading, but I knew I couldn't let him catch me. Every breath burned, my heart threatened to burst from my chest. But the fear of what would happen if he caught up spurred me on. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step. I stumbled, nearly fell, but I kept going. My mind raced, frantically searching for any way out of this nightmare. The trees seemed to close in around me, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I felt like prey, cornered, with nowhere to run. It was suffocating, the terror palpable in the air. I glimpsed a clearing up ahead, a faint glow of moonlight. It was my only chance. I pushed myself harder, willing my legs to move faster, to outrun the horror chasing me. I burst into the clearing, gasping for air, my lungs burning. But there was no relief, no safety. The moonlight revealed the man standing just a few feet away, his twisted grin sending shivers down my spine. I stumbled back, my mind racing for a way out. But there was nowhere left to run. He lunged, and I fought, desperation giving me strength I didn't know I had. We grappled in the darkness, the sounds of our struggle echoing through the night. I fought with all I had, every instinct screaming for survival. Adrenaline surged, but so did fear, a paralyzing terror that threatened to consume me. It was a fight for my life, a fight I couldn't afford to lose. I landed a blow, felt the impact reverberate through my hand. He staggered, and in that split second, I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I collapsed, breathless and trembling, far from that cabin, far from that nightmare. I don't know how I ended up there, in that cabin in the woods. It's a blur, a terrifying gap in my memory that I can't explain. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the chilling terror of being lost, hunted, in the depths of those woods.